Retro Rick's Retro Fest Arkansas was so crazy. It was a celebration of 80s and 90s nostalgia. And in this video, we're talking about everything I saw, everything I picked up, basically everything about this GameCon that I really enjoyed. The first stop had to be Retro Rick's booth, where I headed over and checked out the GameCube section. I was looking for a bunch of GameCube stuff, but I picked up a lot more here. Starting off, I did find Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, but I didn't want to pick something up right away because on the table right across the row was a big full table of GameCube games. They even had wild games like Cubivore, which is absolutely insane. Then I continued on to a booth that had a ton of NES box games, and this next one ended up having a ton of different retro Japanese games. The Star Wars game caught my eye. There was a ton of Nintendo 64 games and Super Nintendo games, even some PS Vita games, and they had a ton of old Famicom disc games, which these were absolutely awesome to see. I've never seen those in person before. This little basket had a few games of basically a bunch of random mishmash stuff, but nothing I had to have, so I had to continue on, where I did end up stopping at this booth, where the guy had a ton of awesome stuff here. He recognized me, we talked for a little bit, but I did end up picking up two games. I got this Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 Loose and NHL Hits 2003. Both were a really good price at $30 for everything, and that ended up being my first pickup of the convention. Obviously, I would rather have this complete, but for $30 for both of these, this was definitely worth it, because this is worth around $31 complete, because this is the NHL Hits 2003, which is the rare one, and then this Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 Loose is worth around $10. So for $40, this is not a bad deal, picking it up for $30. Then I carried on to this next booth, which had a bunch of awesome stuff. This PlayStation 2 controller caught my eye because it was weird and creepy looking, as well as a PSP disc case, which I thought was cool. Then I ended up finding a few GameCube games at this booth. Backyard Football, which, if you didn't know, those games are releasing soon on Steam, which I'm definitely stoked upon. Then they had this absolute monstrosity for $2,000, and even a $50 game here on the NES. I don't know if anyone's heard of Stadium Events. That one was obviously a reproduction, and they marked it, so that's okay there. Then this next booth had a bunch of tubs of games and a few GameCube games that caught my eye. But again, nothing I had to have here, so I continued on, where this one had a ton of Nintendo Switch games. Definitely some awesome stuff there. This Wii Mario Kart box looked absolutely insane and definitely caught my eye there. I ended up getting one game from this booth, and that was 1080 Avalanche, but they did have an in-box Metal Slug First Mission for the Neo Geo Pocket Color, which is absolutely insane. Here, there's just more retro games. Absolutely awesome to see this many and these kind of diversity. I don't see this many different consoles and different game systems in my area, so it's definitely cool to see. I almost picked up this box, but it was a little messed up on the back, so I ended up putting it back. I moved on. You know, Guitar Hero on Tour always catches my eye. Any Guitar Hero game catches my eye, honestly. But I kind of checked through the GameCube games here, but unfortunately there was nothing I had to pick up. But they did have a great Nintendo 64, which caught my eye and definitely piqued my interest. I almost picked it up, but I decided not to, so I continued on. Again, there are so many complete in-box games here. It just blows my mind. There's some definitely awesome stuff at all of these booths, and this booth had a bunch of GameCube games. Like I said, I was looking for them. I ended up getting Metroid Prime and Spider-Man 2 from this booth. This was definitely a good pickup and was probably one that I didn't even need to check on because I knew that $20 for Metroid Prime Complete and $5 for Spider-Man 2 was definitely a great deal. So I ended up picking up both of these because honestly, anytime I can add some GameCube games to the system and not spend a lot of money, it's definitely always worth it. Then I ended up finding a Shrek Super Slam on the Game Boy Advance complete in the box for $10. And this whole table was buy 3, get 1 free, but I didn't find more to make it worth it. So I just ended up getting that Shrek Super Slam. But again, this booth had a ton of awesome stuff. Whether it was the PS1, PS2, there was a ton of awesome stuff here. And just being able to see this much just really blows my mind. This is the first game convention I've actually been to, so seeing this stuff is absolutely awesome. As well as all the crazy stuff. This booth had a lot of heavy headers, and I really wanted to sit and look there more, but there wasn't anything that I had to have, so I continued on where I was looking around. Still in the same booth here, there's a ton of box games, there's a bunch of cool stuff in the back there. I did find a GameCube in box, as well as a GameCube disc and the Game Boy Advanced player, which is probably awesome, and a stack of loose disc games, and some of these games were worth a lot of money, which absolutely blew my mind. This was one I'm just looking for the Game Boy player disc, but I don't want to spend that much money, so I ended up waiting on it and continued on to this next booth. And right before I did, my wife was like, hey, there's a bunch of GameCube games here. So I stopped and kind of looked at them, found Bloody Roar and thought about it, but I didn't really need it because it wasn't on the list. And then my wife ended up finding Hello Kitty Seasons, which is a game I really don't need and don't even know if I would play it, but she got it for like $5 complete, so I guess this is the first of many games that we picked up that I'm probably never gonna play. Oh, and I almost forgot. I got Shrek Super Slam from there for the Game Boy Advance. I don't know how good this game is, but I feel like I'll probably at least enjoy it. I've never played it on the GBA, so it's gonna be interesting. This next booth had a ton of PSP games, which I'm always looking at because I love the PSP, and even some UMD videos there, but honestly, nothing I had to have. A bunch of common games, but then this booth was basically all Japanese games. They had PS4, PlayStation Vita, PS3, PS2, even these drum controllers. I was so tempted to buy them, but I didn't. Donkey Kong 64 looks absolutely insane, as well as some Pokemon games from Japan, and even more crazy stuff here in these glass cases. And right next to it was a ton of GameCube games. This game caught my eye, but it was a cheap motocross game, so I left that behind. But then I ended up stumbling on a few more GameCube games here. This Jimmy Neutron was a game I probably should have had on the list, but for whatever reason it wasn't, so I didn't end up picking it up. Now I kind of wish I had. They also had an Analog Pocket that was cool, and this sealed disc for the GameCube. That was wild. A GoldenEye hat here. A bunch of awesome Nintendo 64 games, even some PS2 games and Xbox 360 games. But then I headed over to Arkansas Picker's booth, and I had brought with me a bunch of Nintendo 64 games worth around $200. And he ended up saying, I'll give you $130 in trade credit, which is perfectly fine and definitely well worth it. So I headed over to his GameCube selection, which was pretty decent and pretty massive, and I ended up picking out a bunch of GameCube games. We'll talk about them all, but this was a great place, and I'm glad we made the deal. Arkansas Picker has some great content. If you've never watched it, you should. He's a cool dude, and I've bought from his flea market booth before, and I knew this was a great place to take these games, so I ended up digging through his GameCube selection and ended up finding some pretty good games here. It ended up totaling to $134, and we ended up making a deal, which is definitely awesome. And I'm definitely glad that I grabbed all of these games because it was well worth the trade. Because I ended up trading for 7 GameCube games. A few of them are on the list and a few aren't. I got Resident Evil, which I already have for the collection, but I picked it up. Definitely a great one to fill the collection. Again, Crash Nitro Kart. I believe I have this one. Maybe not for the GameCube, but I'm glad to be able to add it. Batman Vengeance is probably the one from this deal or list that I am the most stoked for. I cannot wait to play this. I've never played it before, so it's definitely going to be awesome. I grabbed Backyard Baseball. This game has gone up in value since they've announced the new one, so check that out if you're interested. Then we've got Rugrats Royal Ransom. Again, this is kind of a filler title, a cheaper GameCube game. And then we've got Tack and the Great Juju Challenge, as well as Spyro A Hero's Tale, and Ty the Tasmanian Tiger 2 Bush Rescue. Now, a few of these games I have on other consoles, but I'm definitely glad that I ended up picking these up for the GameCube and trading Nintendo 64 games that are duplicates or extras I've got from trades or bundles or stuff like that. I'm definitely glad to turn that into stuff that I don't have for my collection, and this was definitely well worth the trade. Moving on to this next booth, I saw this NES Deluxe set from a mile away, and then right next to it was this Nintendo 64 VHS tape that was definitely awesome. A few more GameCube games here, but again, if the games aren't on my list or I'm not looking for them, I kind of just left them behind here because I wanted to spend my money on things I was looking for. And then right next to it, I walked by this and almost didn't realize it. This was a retro GameStop store in this game convention, which just blew my mind. It was like the GameStop in the area, and they brought in a bunch of retro games, which was pretty cool. I think they could have done a little bit of better signage, but it is what it is. This next booth, I was checking out these games, and I found a few of the cases that I guess they ran out of stickers for, and they were just literally writing with pen on them, so I was not about it. So I got out of this booth pretty quickly. Then I found a few games here and there, as if this whole place isn't filled with games, but this place really took care of their GameCube games. They were all wrapped in plastic with stickers on the plastic. They had a ton of games that were definitely well worth it. But like I said, if they're not on my list and I don't need them, I'm just going to pass them up. So there's a few games that caught my eye, but they weren't on my list. So I continued on and didn't pick them up. Then this dude came up to me and said he's a huge fan of the channel and he wanted to give me some stuff. And he gave me that GameCube game, which is absolutely awesome. I continued on at this booth, which was the Rad Junk booth. They had a ton of awesome stuff, but no GameCube games I needed. And they even had a Little Samson complete in the box with the manual for $5,000, which is just crazy that that game is that expensive nowadays. But I digress. Here we've got more Nintendo GameCube games, but like you probably know, if they're not on the list, I'm not picking them up. So I continued on where I found a few games here and there. Then this section caught my eye, not because of Pool Paradise, but because they ended up having the game Freak Style, which is on my list and a game I've definitely been wanting to pick up lately. So I went ahead and grabbed that. And then I checked out a few more Wii games here and there, but this was definitely a cool experience because someone came up to me and said, hey, I've watched the channel, I love it, I've got a bag of games, would you be interested in any of them? And honestly, I've been looking at GameCube games, so when I saw Sonic Mega Collection, I was like, that's great, I'm looking on a video for GameCube games, so thank you if you watching and you saw that that dude was cool and he came up. Definitely nice to meet you and cool. Anybody that came up to me and talked to me during this whole convention, thank you so much. It's absolutely wild. But I also ended up picking up Freak Style, which is a game I absolutely love. I played this on the PlayStation 2 when I was a kid, and I don't think I've ever played it on the GameCube, so I'm excited to see how this stands up against the PlayStation 2 one. This next booth had a ton of Nintendo Switch games that I definitely checked out, and while I was doing that, I saw they had Metal Slug 7 on the Nintendo DS for 65 bucks, which is a game I'd like to pick up soon, but I didn't pull the trigger here. Moving on, this Donkey Kong Country Pog set just blew my mind. And in the same booth, they had Geist for 50 bucks. I kind of regret not picking this up. But right next to that was a ton of other GameCube games in this tub. But as you all know, if it's not on the list, we're not picking it up. So I continued on to this next booth that had a bunch of other cool stuff, as well as a Lynx in the case and a Virtual Boy over there. But that's not all. They ended up having a complete in-box Neo Geo Pocket Color, which is absolutely awesome. I'd love to have a box for that. But realistically, this table had a ton of boxes, like this Nintendo 64 one for the Smoke Gray, a Virtual Boy box. Then I found a PS1 in this case. I wasn't quite sure what was in it, so of course I had to open it up. And it was a PlayStation 1 console, so I kind of zipped it back up and left it behind. This Kirby game caught my eye, and I thought about picking it up, but for whatever reason, I didn't, which is okay. There was a bunch of other games here. But when I got closer to it, I ended up pulling it out to see if I should pick it up or not. I ultimately ended up passing it, but in the exact same booth, there was an absolute ton of GameCube games here. I'm looking for Super Mario Sunshine, just the disc, because I do have the case. But I did find Naruto Clash of the Ninja 2 for 10 bucks. This was definitely a great find. Definitely well worth picking up. There was a ton of amazing GameCube games here. A really nice selection. I ended up grabbing the Naruto game for sure. And right next to it was this little Game Boy, which I ended up picking up for 10 bucks. So, but I need to buy batteries for this thing. I ended up paying 20 bucks for this and $10 for Naruto Clash of Ninja 2. This was definitely worth it. For 30 bucks, I definitely am glad that I picked these up because this is going to be a good game and I really can't wait to play this thing. This booth had a bunch of games under this glass case that were cool, but then I noticed this bonus disc for Pokemon Coliseum, which was wild, as well as a bunch of consoles here in the box. An Xbox complete in box or that Nintendo 64 from Toys R Us. Those were absolutely insane. Then I ended up finding a booth that's actually about an hour away from me, a game store, and I feel like maybe I need to check this place out one of these days, but nothing here that I had to have. This next booth had a few games here that I was checking out. This caught my eye, but honestly, I figured I probably would enjoy it. All these consoles complete in box were just crazy to me. I saw so many awesome things. Then I stumbled upon a huge tub of GameCube games. There were so many good games here, but honestly, there wasn't really anything I had to have. And I already have this Mary Kate and Ashley Sweet 16 game, so I don't need to buy it again, right? But I wandered back to that booth before because my wife said I missed these GameCube games, but there wasn't anything I absolutely had to have because I already have this NHL Hits game. A ton of awesome complete in-box games there, as well as a few GameCube games here and there. Nothing too crazy, but I did end up finding Disney's Skate Adventure, which I already own, and right next to that was Rocket Power Beach Bandits, which is a game I was looking to pick up. This booth had a bunch of awesome stuff, even a few GameCube games here back in this glass case. I believe they had Pokemon Coliseum back there in the very back as well, and a Jaguar completed in box is just crazy to me, but I did end up picking up Rocket Power Beach Bandits. They wanted 11 bucks for it. I said, would you take 10? And they took it. So even though this is missing the manual, this game complete is worth around $15, so $10 missing the manual, I think was definitely well worth it. And this game looks like it's gonna be a ton of fun to play. At this point, our backpacks were pretty full, so we went and emptied the games that were in our bags in the car, and then we headed right back in to look for more games, where we actually ended up finding this insane looking Pokemon XD box. I would love to have that for the GameCube. It's just insane. A bunch of PSP games here. Like I said, I love looking for PSP games. And then here we go again. Another huge tub of GameCube games here. Definitely some awesome stuff. I definitely think this was well worth it, but honestly, there wasn't anything here that was on my list. These shirts were absolutely insane. They had a ton of awesome stuff. Then over here, I ended up finding a few GameCube games, but I've already got these, so you know I'm not picking them up. There was definitely some cool stuff at this booth, and those shirts were crazy to see. A bunch of cool signs, and then a Zelda skateboard, which is just crazy, as well as some Shrek glasses if you're into that. And then here I ended up finding a Super Monkey Ball, complete in the box for 15 bucks. This is one of those games that's a ton of fun to play if you've never played it, and for some reason, I don't have the first one in my GameCube collection, so I saw this, had to grab it. For 15 bucks, it was a no-brainer. This is definitely well worth it. Then we made it into the free play area and sat down and played Street Fighter, which I'm a Mortal Kombat guy, but I still won most of the stuff. Then this museum had a ton of awesome retro merch from video games, and even the defunct video game accessories. Seeing that sewing machine was crazy, or this NES lock that I feel like is insane to have, but cool to see nonetheless. This table had a ton of Xbox original games, and if you've seen the channel before, you know I love original Xbox games. This booth had a ton of complete and box stuff, even a Donkey Konga, which was pretty cool. I already checked out some of these booths, but checking out these standees or these box consoles was cool. I missed these GameCube games earlier on, but this booth had a ton of fire. These Mario statues were just insanely cool to see. A few controllers here deconstructed was wild. And then I ended up having a decision to make here. And that was deciding what was going to be the grail from this convention. Would it have been the Samurai Jack for the GameCube, which I had my eye on and thought about? Or would it maybe be a Gotcha Force, or that Zelda Four Swords back there? Or maybe something else that was really cool to see? But then I made it to this booth where they had a bunch of cool stuff. And that is when I noticed that they ended up having something over here in the glass case, and that ended up being Ribbit King for the GameCube, and this ended up being $165. However, this is a really good clean copy. There's a little bit of a mark there, but this game, complete like it is with both discs, is going for around $175, so $10 off. I figured this was a great pickup and definitely worth it to be the grail on this list. And I guess I forgot to show this 1080 Avalanche earlier, but I ended up picking it for 10 bucks. Definitely well worth it. However, there was actually a few games that we ended up picking up that for whatever reason we just didn't end up videoing them. These were games that I picked up later on after we had made 3 or 4 roundabouts. I ended up picking up Orb 3D. They wanted $6. I offered $5. I don't have it in my NES collection, so when I see cheap NES games, I pick them up. And then my wife was interested in Snood 2 on Vacation. They wanted $10 for it, which was perfectly fine, but she ended up bundling it with this copy of Umihari Fresh Koishi. What is it? Unihari Koishi Fresh. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. But she ended up getting both of these games, I think for $25, maybe 35 actually. She wanted 40 for this, but ended up selling them for 35, so I think that was a good deal. And then I ended up picking for 12 bucks Super Monkey Ball Banana Mania for 12 bucks. I think I talked them down to 10 for this, but this was definitely a good pickup, and I definitely bought a bunch of awesome games from this convention. This convention, like I said, was the first one I've ever been to, but this was absolutely phenomenal. I found a ton of stuff. I talked to Rick. I talked to a few people online in person for the first time, which was totally crazy. Seeing people like Riff from Pixel Game Squad, who our homies online. Talked to him a few times. It's cool to see in person. JRPG Life and JRPG Wife were there. That was cool. Like Woodman Classics was there. There was a ton of people that I saw that were cool to talk to, and it was definitely awesome. But also, there was a ton of people that watched this channel that came up and say, yo, I've seen your channel, whether it was on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever they saw it. It just blows my mind that people came up to me and said they enjoy my content. So if you're watching this and you made it this long, thank you so much. This game convention was absolutely awesome, and this kind of has me hooked to want to go to more game conventions. So if you can think of any I need to go to, comment down below. But this was definitely an awesome convention, definitely well worth it, and I'm really stoked what I saw there. But I'm going to get out of here because I've got some games here I've got to play. So make sure you check out that video right there. But overall, I feel like I bought a bunch of GameCube games that were on my list that I didn't have. A bunch of other stuff as well that I saw that was cool, and it really finds some amazing things that you've never seen before if you go to a game convention. So you might want to do that. But for the time being, I'm getting out of here, so check out that video out if you haven't already.